Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie. This show is designed to provide an exclusive forum on educational achievement gaps related to learner success while discovering relationships and family issues in diverse settings.
Welcome back to the Impact of Education Leadership 10th episode. I'm your host, ID3, along with Professor Jeff Willie. Our guest is the dedicated and devoted Dr. MJ. This evening's topic: do demographics affect leadership styles? This will be a thought-provoking discussion because leadership can be distinct in the way that it affects activities in a group to achieve certain goals. Leadership changes a potential to a reality, and it becomes the main activity that gives a sense of success to that group and its environment. Meaning everything that is connected to that success, the success of the leadership, should benefit toward the achievement of a distinguished objective. Leadership styles are reflected in practices, in the result of the way the individual thinks and feels. The primary purpose of this discussion is to identify and describe the leadership styles of current executives and demographics, relates to gender, age, tenure, that influence leadership practices. And should they be bound by the status quo, or should they be open to innovation and encouraged to take risks within the organization for the purpose of achieving common goals? So, Professor Jeff Willie and Dr. MJ, please say hello to the people.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining and listening, and looking forward to a very provocative discussion with Dr. MJ. And thank you, Isaiah, for hosting. It's always an honor to be part of what you're doing and how you're reaching out to the community and impacting lives. So thank you.
Any feedback? I'm excited to hear what the audience thinks, and perhaps someone has different perspectives. I look forward to hearing that.
You know, that's awesome, and we sure will be looking for that, for those comments on the discussion questions. I want to first give the first question to Professor Willie. And before I give that question, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Professor Willie. Professor Willie is an associate professor for the University of Phoenix, Dallas-Fort Worth campus, facilitating in business, leadership, and humanities classes. Professor Jeff is he's also a John Maxwell Team Executive Director, International Certified Executive Leadership Consultant, Coach, Trainer, Keynote Motivational Speaker, and Conflict Resolution Trainer. He's also certified with DISC Behavior Analysis, and he does consulting in that field as well. His primary focus, though, is educational leadership development. With that being said, Professor Jeff Willie, my question for you this evening is, what are your two favorite leadership styles as it relates to emotional intelligence, and why? And why is that?
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie.
Absolutely. Great question. And I'm going to, just to start this out, Isaiah, I'm going to give you some text to help the audience understand where information is coming from. This is not Jeff Willie coming off the cuff, but with research and authors and backgrounds and doing things out there. Let's first define emotional intelligence. And I guess my primary source for emotional intelligence is using the Daniel Goleman book. And that's the purpose of that. So I want to define that what emotional intelligence is by using his components and his essence of the definition of emotional intelligence. You know, we talk about IQ, we talk about EQ, and then I want to share a story. So just kind of bear with me for a second, then I get into those leadership style. Emotional intelligence course is self-awareness, your self-regulation, you're motivated, you have discipline, you have empathy, you have social skills, you have integrity, you are a trusting person, and you can learn to navigate your world without having that significant high IQ. And the reason I bring that to the forefront at the beginning of this question is because my father did not have the IQ. He was completely illiterate, couldn't read and write, but he served his country during World War II, raised 12 children, took care of my mother and took care of all of us, and he fostered a lifelong learning in his children, but yet he didn't have the IQ, but he had the emotional intelligence. He was able to navigate his world and connect with people and connect with resources based on that intelligent ability. So that's the significance of emotional intelligence, and that's coming from Daniel Goleman, but I got a chance to live that and understand that later on in life by watching my father and reflecting back on how he navigated the world without the IQ that some people highlight. But without, you can have the IQ and don't have the EQ, and you still will not be successful. So just want to bring it up to the forefront. And I looked at some of these leadership styles. Let me give you my essence of leadership style. There's only one leadership style that should be relevant to change people's lives. And then, of course, I talk about transformational leadership, and I talk about servant leadership. And then you kind of meld those two together. But the focus is on servant leadership. And let me give you some significant text to help with that, so you know the authors or the listening audience would know exactly where they can go back and listen to this. And I hope they add these books to their library, understand the essence of the key components and the key impact and how you transform lives. And we talk about transformational leadership, and you want to transform lives by servant leadership. That's where we are. That's where we have to be. Now, let me give you some context or some text associated with that, so the audience, when they listen, they can add these books to the library. I'm coming from Robert Greenleaf. I think he's the father of research on regards to servant leadership. Then I want to even go a little further, and I want to add some of the most current authors, and I want to throw in Ken Blanchard, Lead Like Jesus. And I want to also add Ken Blanchard, Servant Leadership in Action. And then I want to come to the 2000, and I want to bring in Cheryl Boxholder, who was a former CEO of Popeye's Chicken, Dare to Serve. And then I want to go down to South Texas, Houston area, and I want to bring in PhD faculty member of the University of Houston by the name of Dr. Brene Brown, called Dare to Lead. So I'm hoping that your audience, listening audience tonight, will grab those texts and understand the aspect of leadership, servant leadership. Jesus came to serve and not to be served. When you serve people, you transform their lives. You inspire them. And we have looked at that. When I'm doing a servant leadership or Lead Like Jesus workshop, I focus on the aspect we need to turn the pyramid upside down. That the pyramid is not going to the top. The person that's responsible for taking care of me is serving me and looking up and making sure that my needs are being met. You're inspiring me. You're encouraging me. You're motivating me. You are visionary. You reward appropriately. You adapt to change appropriately. And you lead by example. Your focus is to meet my needs, to help me become the best person possible and to live out my potential.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willey.
When I become the best person possible, and then loyalty takes place. Turnover rates are decreased. Absenteeism is decreased. Long-term tenure is increased in a job, because the focus of leadership is one key component. Leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. If you listen to some of them, I'm quoting from John Maxwell from many books that he has written, and he talks about that leadership is influence. And if you look at some of the other leaders of the history of the negative influence, it was influence. You can use many folks that led people down the path of destruction, but they still had what? significant influence over those folks. They had influence over those folks. So when you look at servant leadership, you have influence, and your focus is not to meet your needs, but to meet the needs of the people that you're responsible for taking care of. So it has to be a servant mindset. I love people. I have to fall in love with people, and the essence of leadership is not about a job. It's not about a task. It's about the people. Serve the people well, they will carry out the task, and they will serve
now,
your
Professor Willie,
well.
now, Professor Willie, I'm not going to tell you how good that sounds. I'm not going to tell you how good that sounds, okay?
Yes, sir. I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop right there.
You made a bridgeway word, and it was influence, and you connected influence to your two favorite types of leadership, which is transformational and servant leadership. Now, servant leadership, you explicitly said that it transforms lives. And then you mentioned some authors. I'm not going to go back and mention all those authors that you mentioned. I did write them down, but for the listeners, they can go back and rewind or whatever they want to do, play it back, and then they can take notes on that, because there's so much content and what Professor Willie just said. I want to ask another question to Dr. MJ. Okay. Now, first of all, before I go into that, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. MJ.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie. This show is designed to provide an exclusive forum on educational achievement gaps related to learner success while discovering relationships and family issues in diverse settings.
So you listeners know exactly what she is walking with, what she is carrying. Well, all right, Dr. MJ is Doctor of Management and Organizational Leadership. She is a published writer. She's a adjunct professor for the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. She's a talent developer, programmer, and management. And she sits on the advisory board for the Chicago School of Professional Psychology as well. Dr. MJ is also the president of the chapter and the University of Phoenix Alumni Association for Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. She's highly intelligent. She's caring, dynamic leader. She's results and performance output driven. She's people oriented, and she's responsible. Also, she's creative, and she's a visionary. She's also a humble person and a team player. Dr. MJ, let me ask you this question. What processes do you use to predict a leader's level of emotional intelligence?
Well, thank you, Isaiah. Wow, that's very beautiful what you just said. I'm going to take that and put it on a frame about myself to remind me. Let me just tell you that throughout my time, one as a student learning, and also as employee, and also as community activist, what I have learned is to combine different processes, different methodologies, because one situation cannot be morphed into another situation. So what worked in one area is not going to work in another area. And when we are talking about how do we predict a leader's level of emotional intelligence, it's really about behavior. And if we pay attention about a person's behavior in a situation that is stressful, one just needs to observe how this person will behave and then begin to assess. So emotional intelligence is basically skills, and the emotional intelligence is demonstrated through behavior-driven actions. So it's by the behavior, by something is influencing that behavior, and then the person acts on those behaviors, but it's to what degree that person applies the skills. Everyone is emotionally intelligent. Not everyone has the same level of emotional intelligence for every situation. And that's how I can predict when a person may not perform or may not make the best decisions. If the person is impulsive, for example, that is one of the skills on emotional intelligence. If a person is a risk taker and it's appropriate for the situation, maybe being impulsive is a good thing. But if it's impulsive and prematurely making decisions, then that does not demonstrate the ability to solve problems. And as leaders are responsible for continually solving problems and finding solutions, but there has to be a balance.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie.
Could I just add to that? And thank you so much. I like the fact that you said about how they respond, especially your risk-taking, and if it's not appropriate for the current situation, and you based on behaviors, and that is a great, phenomenal measuring stick of emotional intelligence, is how you respond, and you respond out of your thinking, your subconscious mind, and and those behaviors, those actions now become relevant and prevalent to folks that evaluate if that person has significant emotional intelligence. I like the way you said there's a different level. We have different IQs, we have different EQs as well, and so I might respond to a situation differently, and it might be inappropriate. And when I say inappropriate, I mean it's being evaluated by someone else. They might assume it's inappropriate, especially for the type of influence we have on our subordinates and our co-workers and our peers. And that's what you just said, Dr. MJ, is based on those observable behaviors. And I really appreciate you bringing that out. Very, very poignant. Start recognizing the behavior of others and start evaluating. Do a self-reflection now on myself.
Finding solutions, but there has to be a balance.
Could I just add to that? And thank you so much. I like the fact that you said about how they respond, especially your risk-taking, and if it's not appropriate for the current situation, and you based on behaviors, and that is a great, phenomenal measuring stick of emotional intelligence, is how you respond, and you respond out of your thinking, your subconscious mind, and and those behaviors, those actions now become relevant and prevalent to folks that evaluate if that person has significant emotional intelligence. I like the way you said there's a different level. We have different IQs, we have different EQs as well, and so I might respond to a situation differently, and it might be inappropriate. And when I say inappropriate, I mean it's being evaluated by someone else. They might assume it's inappropriate, especially for the type of influence we have on our subordinates and our co-workers and our peers. And that's what you just said, Dr. MJ, is based on those observable behaviors. And I really appreciate you bringing that out. Very, very poignant. And I think our audience was going to appreciate that and start recognizing the behavior of others and start evaluating. Do a self-reflection now on myself. Do I have the appropriate emotional intelligence to respond to this particular situation?
No, I said that is correct. I think when a person learns, perhaps just through reading, in fact, yes, we have lots of books out there, but nowadays you can find, even on LinkedIn or Google or YouTube, lots of literature or information on what emotional intelligence is. Also take the time to understand what emotional intelligence is not, and that is how a person will begin to pay attention to his or her behaviors. Most importantly, it's going to benefit that person when that person becomes self-aware of what may be affecting, because it's an affective responses. We respond to our environment, and if we have not developed those emotional intelligence skills to address that situation, then that even includes how we speak, how we express ourselves. If I am in a situation where I need to assert myself, and I'm not asserting myself, then I may forego opportunities where the other individuals may think I'm too passive, I'm too afraid, I'm not confident. There has to be a balance of how much can I say, how do I say it, and without being offensive. it's really beautiful when a person develops those skills and knows almost like the temperature, when to raise the temperature to a certain degree that's going to be comfortable for everyone.
You know,
Very
I got to
good.
say that's good. That's good, Professor Willie.
Yes,
You know,
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Dr.
Thank
MJ
you.
said, and I'm just rewinding in my mind what you said, Dr. MJ, as far as skills. So the first thing you got to do is you got to find out what someone is talented at, you know, and you're a talent manager. And so then you can do assessments once you find out what this person is actually gifted in, and then you can see how they operate in their environments when it relates to stress and deadlines, and you can see their behavior. And then you combine all that information to make your final, I guess, analysis or your final judgment on how to measure, you know, what you can expect from this person. I'm thinking that's what you're saying. You're the expert in this field. That's why we have you on the podcast tonight. But with that being said, and Professor Willie, matter of fact, let me just ask you this now. Can we determine, or is this enough information to determine if demographics affects leadership styles?
No. I say no. I can't say it unequivocally, but let me back up just a little bit and ask Dr. MJ this question, and maybe it's Isaiah, you may have some input as well. But she, what was at the forefront of my head right now is that when you look at the emotional intelligence in our response, I guess my question is dealing with history and our upbringing and our environment and our nurturing and all those aspects of dealing with our being parented, and how we dealt with conflict, how we dealt with communication within the family, and then how our parents communicated with us and taking those risks and how to respond, and then are we modeling the same behavior parents. And our emotional intelligence can be increased, it can be strengthened once the person becomes self-aware and work on that and work towards that. But my question to Dr. MJ is that do you believe that obviously our upbringing has a lot to do with how we respond and how we deal with emotional intelligence?
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie. This show is designed to provide an exclusive forum on educational achievement gaps related to learner success while discovering relationships and family issues in diverse settings.
Yes, Professor, you mentioned bringing the environment. We have heard about, you know, without getting into the theories and all the history about nature versus nurture. But whenever you have time for the audience to read about Albert Bandura and all the experiments that were conducted, if anyone has history on the surrogate monkey, preferring the monkey that had clothes instead of the one that did not, and that's the nurturing part. So when parents nurture behaviors that reinforce innate skills that we are born with, such as language, the desire to belong. By nature, we want to belong, and sometimes if those behaviors are not nurtured, then we may begin to develop other behaviors. But everything that has to do with emotional intelligence is changing, and this is the reason why demographics do not directly have a correlation between age and gender. We know that women are more outspoken, and that's just because when we're little, our parents nurture that. We are more expressive, and culturally speaking, so we're mixing a tall order of variables here, and that's why I don't want to discuss the theory and the variables and the mathematics behind how do we measure all this. But just in simple words is that women and men are raised, influenced by culture, depending where they grow up. And hardly ever we question our parents' upbringing, and we just pass it on, and it becomes a repetitive cycle that we just embrace and think that is normal until we unlearn beliefs that we thought, okay, a woman should always speak up and cry and be emotional. in a drama queen, right? But when we think about men, that's not appropriate for a man. Well, says who? So going back to demographics, there is no evidence to support that emotional intelligence is greater on people of a certain gender. And in fact, that was part of my research study. In my research study, I measured gender, age, and level of education. And what I discovered in the research is that there is no correlation. In fact, the correlation exists mostly on when the person matures. And I think that it's just a matter of experience. As we get older, we learn our lessons, and therefore we learn to say things or not say things or avoid certain things, but it's not necessarily a methodical approach of learning the process. It's more about hard experiences sometimes, or someone correcting us.
Yes. Very good. Thank you for that clarification, and thank you for that. And thank you for your research on that. I think our listening audience is going to really appreciate what you bring to the table. And I really appreciate what you bring to the table tonight. Good job. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Professor Willie, let me go ahead and ask you another question. I want to really pick your brain tonight here, because I know you are, well, both of you are extremely passionate about this topic. Professor Willie, how then can the impact of educational leadership help predict and work harmoniously with different leadership styles to create successful teamwork in organizational settings or different environments?
Right.
What are your thoughts?
Great question.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie.
And I want to preface that. I want to take out the word educational. I just want to use the word leadership. And leadership, it doesn't matter if it's an educational arena. Yeah, if it's in a church arena, if it's in the business arena, if it's in the home, it's the home leadership and that harmonious relationship styles. And everyone has somewhat of a different leadership style. But my focus would be, I'll give an example. I'm raising two daughters, and I'm the father. And my leadership style, they're going to model some of my leadership style and behavior patterns. And then they're going to grow up and be independent as well. But they also want to learn and pick up some other traits from their environment and other folks that have influence over them. And my responsibility as a leader, as a servant leader, is get to know my people. My responsibility is not to develop followers. My responsibility is to develop other leaders. So I have to have an environment that fosters developing leadership and risk-taking. And the key component to all of that is communication. Whether you are listening, not necessarily talking, but you're listening and you're observing, is how men and women are interacting with one another.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie.
But how we communicate, because how we communicate, how we are wired. We all have different behavior traits. We all have different personalities. We all respond to things differently. As Dr. MJ said, some people, you may respond passively in certain areas. You may respond aggressively in certain areas. So you got multiple communication styles based on situations that you're responding to. And my responsibility as a leader is to understand that and to be able to communicate with you the way you desire to be communicated with, or how you are wired. My message that I'm sending to you is that I'm communicating with you the way you desire to be communicated with. That's the focus.
Leadership styles to create successful teamwork in organizational settings or different environments.
Right.
What are your thoughts?
Great question. And I want to preface that. I want to take out the word educational. I just want to use the word leadership. And leadership, it doesn't matter if it's an educational arena. Yeah, if it's in the church arena, if it's in the business arena, if it's in the home, it's the home leadership and that harmonious relationship styles. And everyone has somewhat of a different leadership style. But my focus would be, I can give an example. I'm raising 2 daughters, and I'm the father. And my leadership style, they're going to model some of my leadership style and behavior patterns. And then they're going to grow up and be independent as well. But they also going to learn and pick up some other traits from their environment and other folks that have influence over them. And my responsibility as a leader, as a servant leader, is get to know my people. My responsibility is not to develop followers. My responsibility is to develop other leaders. So I have to have an environment that fosters developing leadership and risk-taking. And the key component to all of that is communication. Whether you are listening, not necessarily talking, but you're listening and you're observing is how men and women are interacting with one another, but how we communicate, because how we communicate, how we are wired. We all have different behavior traits. We all have different personalities. We all respond to things differently. As Dr. MJ said, some people, you may respond passively in certain areas. You may respond aggressively in certain areas. So you got multiple communication styles based on situations that you're responding to. And my responsibility as a leader is to understand that and to be able to communicate with you the way you desire to be communicated with, or how you are wired. My message that I'm sending to you is that I'm communicating with you the way you desire to be communicated with. My message to you is that I'm valuing you as who you are. That's the focus. Once I value you as a person, that you're different than I am, you're different from anyone else, and I value you for being you, and I have a lot of respect for you, my responsibility is to communicate with you the way you want to be desired to be communicated with. Sometimes you might not know what your wired communication style is. Through certain assessments, of course, you can determine that, and then my responsibility is to help you grow and strengthen that and become a bridge builder to strengthen your communication style, strengthen your emotional intelligence, teach you how to respond, and coach you through some appropriate response based on certain situations. So the focus, the key word of that, the key foundation of that is I value you as a person. I communicate with you based on how you desire to be communicated with, because I value you as a person and I respect your current leadership style. And your leadership style may not be appropriate for organizations, and sometimes that may be the departure of a person because your leadership style is not focused on the missions and the goals and objectives of this organization. And so that's become, because you will act out and behave out those certain leadership styles, and my responsibility is to help you grow and strengthen those leadership styles.
Professor, well, you said something in the very beginning of this episode. You said that you saw your father navigate through the world with common sense, is basically what I got from that. Because, yes.
Yeah, common sense, as we say in the South, we do use that word, common sense, we do, but it's always...
Well, I know you use IQ and EQ, but, right. To me, that was I'm from the South, so tonight, tonight only, I'm going to say common sense. And you actually gave me a book. You actually gave me a book to read, and I finished reading the book. It's called The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino, I believe.
Correct.
And so I finished reading that book, and my takeaway from that book was developing leaders, that's one part, but developing others into leaders in the spirit of love, for me, that was the total part, that was the wholeness, if I can say that word. That was the wholeness that I got from that book. And then Dr. MJ, she was talking about some very pivotal steps and processes that she uses in her methodology or in her process or in some of her tools that I was gaining from. And I want her to go more in depth in that.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie.
She was talking about the skills, she was talking about assessment, she was talking about understanding how employers and leaders and managers operate during stress, and looking at their behaviors, looking at their actions, and kind of seeing if they're making premature decisions or if they're trying to find ways of making more positive solutions. And so Dr. MJ, let me ask you a question as it relates to that. What are some tools that researchers, based off your research, are using to measure leadership styles in the current field of, let's just say management?
Okay, so if you were to Google all these leadership styles or management styles assessments, you'll get more than a dozen. And I'm not necessarily disqualifying these assessments, but I have to be consistent with science. While these assessments, many times you can take them for free, they will give you some insight. To really trust them, they have to be scientifically validated. So for the assessment that I had to complete my research with is the multi-factor leadership quotient. It's called the MLQ, and that can be accessed through Mind Cousin. And there are a lot of other assessments. In fact, tomorrow, talking about assessments as a professional talent development manager and doing trainings, I have an all-day training tomorrow for a REST certification. I am certified on Clifton Strengths, and that is scheduled for tomorrow, again, just so I can refresh my mind. But that's really another way to saying what are your top strengths. If you're going to be in a leadership position or you're going to be interacting with people, you want to understand what are your top strengths as a leader or as a manager, and then understand what the strengths of your team are. And that instrument measures people, performance, and processes. So I discovered that as a leader, I'm very performance process driven, and I need to improve on my people skills. Surprisingly, through my emotional intelligence competencies that I have developed for the past 6 years, since 2013 that I took the assessment, I discovered that my empathy was relatively lower than my other skills. And I have been working intentionally to develop my people skills. When I approach someone, I am very intentional to be impersonal, to listen, to communicate effectively, because I became aware of some gaps in those skills, and so I have developed them, and I work intentionally. It's not natural for me, but with time they can be developed. So, just to give you a list of different assessments, they are public, but if they are not scientifically validated, then I would question the validity, and I would not take it very seriously if they say that I'm not effective on this area, because it could be a subjective assessment. So you have to look for other assessments that are going to validate the results.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie.
Professor Willie is also, that's his lane. Professor Willie, I know you got something to give us, because that is your lane right there, sir.
Yeah, I am looking back in history with the multiple assessments that I have been exposed to. Obviously, the first one I was exposed to years ago in the military was the Myers-Briggs. And that one, and then and then of course DISC, and then the most one. There's another one called the Strength Finder that I hear a lot of people using right now. I don't know if Dr. MJ is familiar with that one. Matter of fact, I was talking to someone today about that. Another coach, a leadership coach, he mentioned Strength Finder. There's an assessment that's out of Canada. It was birthed in Canada called the Lumina Assessment, and I know some people running around the DFW area right now is using that to do leadership assessments, or behavior assessments, or personality assessments. And I've actually taken that Lumina. I've taken all four of those. I've taken the Myers-Briggs, I've taken the DISC, I've taken the Lumina, and I've taken the Strength Finder. And so I guess the gamut of that, but which one I never heard of before was the MLQ, and I wrote that down, and I'm going to be doing my research and homework on that one. So I thank you for exposing me to that as well. And when I've taken some of those assessments, and one of the things that I had to work on is being a little bit more personable and being able to listen and be intentional about listening as well. When I look at that gap, and then when I'm meeting people, I want to be able to listen and listen and not open my mouth and not share my story, but connect with you based on your story and elevate you into a certain position and not de-elevate, but elevate you. And so that was one of my gaps in doing some of my assessments, and I'm intentional about now becoming a better listener.
Well, Professor Willie and Dr. MJ, because we're almost out of time, as far as it relates to this question, do demographics affect leadership styles? So, like, what's the final draw on that topic? Like, what are you saying indefinitely? Does it matter? Does it not matter? And why?
Are you? Go ahead, Dr. MJ.
Okay, I just want to close this last thought. In like anything, we have to define things. So, what are you including in the demographics? Specifically, just the age and the gender, and you also have tenure, which I'm probably thinking is a level of experience. And
I'm talking about neighborhood. I'm talking about neighborhoods. I'm talking about the neighborhoods
so the demographics.
You grew up in. Right.
I say there is no correlation directly by the leadership style. Many other factors are going to influence the leadership style, and especially because we're talking about skills. But culture and upbringing is going to influence the demographics, whether it's making a certain choices in life, but not directly correlating now. This is the beauty of science. We can continue to test, but I don't, as far as I'm aware, there is no correlation that there is a direct correlation. So, Professor, what do you have to say?
I'm in agreement with that, and I'm going to just kind of preface what inside of what Isaiah is asking in regards to the neighborhoods, the environment, all those things. Those are things that's going to affect decision making and everything, but it doesn't have to do with my gender, has nothing to do with my age, has nothing to do with my ethnicity, has nothing to do with my culture. It's all those things are coming into play in anything I do, because of those are factors that influence my behavior, period. But my focus is, if I want to lead people and I value people, and there's some gaps in those areas that I need to impact and influence people, then my responsibility, regardless of my upbringing, regardless of my gender, regardless of my age, regardless of my culture, regardless of my ethnicity, I need to work on those gaps, because at the end of the day, it's about moving the needle on people's life and helping people grow. And happen as you grow and being transparent and share your weaknesses as well as your strength, and people recognize weaknesses. We just have to be humble enough to share those and let people know, because people that you're influencing will help you grow as a leader, because you helping them grow as a leader. So I don't see the impact or the correlation of demographics have any significant correlation on leadership styles.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie.
I'll be the bad guy here, because what I don't want to see, I don't want to see a group or a culture or a demographic, have more knowledge about barbecue than they do EQ or IQ, and they give more relevance to that. Okay, I don't want to see that. I don't want to go in the neighborhood and you start talking about IQ and EQ, and they're looking for barbecue. Man, get out of here. We know about barbecue, but we don't know about all this stuff you're talking about. And so I'm looking to see how can we instill these principles into the coming generations. The importance.
Can I just
of emotional intelligence? Yeah, absolutely.
Follow up with that. I know we're getting close to being out of time. Obviously, we all come from different backgrounds. We all, as we get older, we get wiser. Somewhat, supposedly, we become more mature, more wiser. But as we walk in this lane of what I call continual growth and growth-mindedness, the way you influence people is through relationships. You change behavior is by positive affirmation, and that's through relationship. I accept you as you are, and then I can communicate barbecue even though I am all, but most people know what EQ is, they just don't know how to define it. They know what IQ is, they are doing it, they're walking it, and they're living it every day. We come through as researchers and folks that have done homework and research, we put a label on that. People are living it out on a daily basis. And then we want to get them to understand and reflect and become self-aware. When you can move a person to a level of self-awareness and willing to make the change, the growth takes place, regardless of those other issues of my background, or my demographics, my ethnicity, or my gender, or my age. Self-awareness and relationships and communications in our job as educators and researchers and from different backgrounds. And now we can all come together as researchers and educators because we all come from different backgrounds. But yet we still can come to the table because we have a significant amount of information that's going to move our needle, and it's going to help other people move their needle as well.
All right, well, we are out of time for this evening. I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in tonight.
Really encourage everyone to, might not be able to change your current circumstances of your neighborhood, but you can begin to change what you put in your mind and learning. So you may not be able to change that physical environment, but you can change the mental environment and not believe everything that you hear about your potential outcome in your life, being Hispanic or African American or Asian, white, tall, black, it doesn't matter. It starts with your mind, and how you nurture your mind is going to completely transform the outside, the choices that you make, and the decisions will follow for life.
And my takeaway and my follow-up and my addition to that is that your past doesn't determine your future. You have to be in an environment that's going to help you grow, and you got to make up your mind consciously and intentionally. Make up your mind, decide I am going to become a difference maker for me so I can become a difference maker for others. And once you add value to you, you start changing, and then the environment around you will change because your mind has been changed.
All right, well, thank you again for joining us to the Impact of Educational Leadership. This was the 10th episode, and so we thank you so much.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willey. This show is designed to provide an exclusive forum on educational achievement gaps related to learner success while discovering relationships and family issues in diverse settings.